The story begins with a 20-year-old boy named Will Hunting. He lives in a very poor neighborhood, but works at the world's most famous university, MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It sounds great to hear, but the truth is that Will doesn't study there at all. He just cleans the university buildings. One day, while he is cleaning the hallway, he notices a very difficult math problem written on the board. This problem was written by Professor Gerald Lambo. He had challenged the entire college that whoever could solve this problem would have their name printed in the university's books and would gain both fame and respect. Will looks at the problem carefully and his mind gets stuck on it. He spends the whole day thinking about that problem. Even when he's at the bar with his friends, his mind remains tangled in that problem. Suddenly, he leaves his friends and goes straight to his small old house so he can spend the whole night working on that problem. He doesn't have a board at home, so he writes the solution on the bathroom mirror, erasing mistakes and trying again and again. After several hours, he finally solves the problem. A few days later, when he goes to work, he writes the correct solution on the board while cleaning. And when Professor Lambo sees the solution written on the board, he is astonished. He can't believe that any of his students solved such a difficult problem so quickly. He becomes restless to find out who this genius is. That same evening, Will is out with his friends. On the way, they run into some people. One of the boys makes fun of a girl. Will recognizes that boy. He was the same person who used to trouble him a lot in childhood. Angry, Will tells his friend to stop the car, and without thinking, gets out and attacks him directly. Will punches him, and in no time, a fight breaks out between the two groups. After a while, the police arrive at the scene. Will's friends try to pull him away to save him, but by then it's already too late. The police arrest Will. The next morning, Professor Lambeau is giving a lecture to his students. Everyone's eyes are fixed on him because they all want to know who solved such a difficult problem. But no one in the class gives an answer. The professor, a bit disappointed, says that if someone has solved the previous question, then now he'll give them an even harder one. He explains that this is the same problem he and his colleagues have been working on for the past 2 years, and now that very question is written on the board. Meanwhile, Will comes out of the police station and tells his friends that he has a court date next week. In the evening, he goes to his job and once again sees an easy question written on the board there. He quickly starts solving it so that no one sees him. Just then, Professor Lambeau comes out of his office and sees Will writing on the board. He angrily asks, "What are you doing here?" Will immediately apologizes and steps back. The professor thinks that this boy is just a troublemaker, scribbling on the board for no reason. He tries to catch him, but Will quickly disappears from there. When the professor looks at the board again, he realizes that the correct answer is written there. Seeing this, he is stunned. In the evening, after finishing work, Will goes to a bar with his friends and tells them that he has been fired from his job. Now he won't be able to come inside the university and solve the questions. His friends ask, "Why were you fired?" So Will jokingly says, "The management just made some changes." The next day, Professor Lambeau decides that he will now find this mysterious genius. He goes straight to the janitor's office and asks for the name of a boy who works there. But the staff there think that the professor has come to complain about the cleaning, so they don't immediately tell him Will's name. After a while, it is revealed that Will was not working as a janitor at MIT by choice, but rather as part of community service assigned by the court. Now, the day to hear his case had arrived. Professor Lambeau is also present in the court. Everyone there sees that Will is fighting his own case. He demonstrates such knowledge about law and society that everyone is astonished. But there are many previous cases against him. So the judge sends him to jail and sets his bail at $50,000. Sometime later, Professor Lambeau comes to visit Will in jail. He tells him that the judge has allowed him to get out of jail, but with 2 conditions. First, Will must study with the professor every week. Second, he has to meet with a psychologist every week so that his anger and criminal tendencies can be reduced. Will feels that he doesn't need a psychologist, but he agrees to this condition in order to be free. After getting out of jail, he starts studying with the professor and easily solves even the most difficult problems. The professor is very impressed by his abilities. But therapy is not that easy. The professor calls several different doctors, but none of them are able to handle Will. The first doctor actually gets scared because Will mocks the book he wrote. Will says that he read his book in a single night and there was nothing special in it. Hearing this, the doctor gets angry and leaves the session. The second psychologist tried to handle Will in a different way. He tried to put him under hypnosis to make him sleep, but that method doesn't work either. Seeing this, Professor Lambeau almost gives up. That's when he remembers his old college friend Sean McGuire, who is now a psychologist. They go to Professor Sean's office to tell him about Will's case and invite him to discuss it together at a restaurant. At first, Sean refuses because his schedule is very busy. But Professor Lambeau explains to him that Will is not an ordinary boy, but a genius of a completely different level. He compares him to that famous mathematician who made great discoveries without any formal education. Hearing this, Sean finally agrees to meet Will. In the first session, Will, as usual, tries to annoy the doctor with his rudeness and jokes. He even mocks Sean's painting and says that it's absolutely worthless. Sean doesn't get angry at this and remains calm. But when Will makes fun of his personal life and his wife, Sean gets extremely upset. In a stern tone, he says, "If you mention my wife's name again, I'll destroy you." And with that, he ends the session. Later, when Professor Lambeau sees that Sean is upset, he tells him that he can drop the case if he wants. But Sean clearly says that he will definitely meet Will again next week. After the first session, Sean keeps thinking about Will's words for a long time, especially when he mentioned his wife. These memories make him feel lonely. Meanwhile, Will moves a little forward in his life. He goes on a date with Skylar, the girl he met at the bar. Skylar tells him that she inherited a lot of money from her father and is thinking about enrolling at Stanford University. They have a wonderful evening together, and in the end, they kiss at a diner. Now comes the second therapy session. This time, instead of the office, Sean takes Will to a bench in the park. As soon as Will starts his usual jokes and teasing, Sean stops him. Sean says that he has thought a lot about what Will said, and now he has something to say. He explains that even though Will is very educated and intelligent, he knows nothing about real life. He may know about every artist in the world from books, but he has never left Boston to see their real artworks. He can recite books written about war, but he has never seen a battlefield. He can recite poems about love, but he has never truly loved a woman, nor has he ever completely opened himself up to someone. And most importantly, until Will himself talks about his pain, no one can truly understand what it feels like to be an orphan. Sean says that you can't learn all this from books. Life itself teaches you the real lessons. In the next session, Will remains silent the entire time. Sean sits quietly because he knows that Will is just testing him, and he turns out to be right. In the very next session, Will breaks his silence and tells Sean a dirty joke. After this, the two start having lighthearted conversations. Will talks about his date. He gives it, and Sean asks if he will meet Skylar again. At that point, Will accepts a truth. He gives it, and Sean asks if he will meet Skylar again. At that point, Will accepts a truth. He says maybe not because he doesn't want the perfect image Skylar has of him to be shattered. But Sean explains to him that, in reality, Will is afraid of the perfect image he himself has created, not the girl's. In real relationships, you have to accept each other's flaws and habits. Sean tells the story of his wife, who recently passed away, and says that it's her little habits and quirks that he misses the most. True love and closeness only happen when we accept a person along with their flaws. For the first time, Will listens attentively. On the other hand, Will goes to Skylar's hostel to meet her. Skylar is surprised because Will hadn't called her in a long time, but she agrees to go out with him. The very next day, under a bright and clear sky, the two of them decide to go and watch an exhilarating and highly anticipated dog race. As they settle into their seats, Will, with a mischievous glint in his eyes and carefully concealing the true circumstances of his family, playfully and jokingly remarks to his companion that he astonishingly has a grand total of 12 older brothers, a statement designed to amuse and perhaps slightly mislead. Skylar laughs and says that's a lie, but Will swears on it, making the story even more entertaining. It even gets to the point where he has to promise that he'll introduce Skylar to his family soon. After that, Skylar asks Will how someone can know if they've found their true soulmate. This question sticks in Will's mind, and the next day, he asks Sean the same thing. Sean understands and then tells a story. Once, he got tickets to a very rare baseball game, but he skipped the game because he met a beautiful girl at a bar that same day. Sean says he still doesn't regret missing that game. Skylar keeps insisting that Will introduce her to his real family, but Will still avoids telling the truth, so he decides at least to introduce her to his friends. She jokes around and drinks beer, but at the end of the night, something Chuck says ruins Will's mood. Meanwhile, Professor Lambeau meets Sean at a diner and asks questions about Will's therapy. Lambeau actually doesn't care about Will's future. He just wants to know what Will is going to do next in his field. Sean says he won't pressure Will because Will has to decide for himself. He adds that he's already introduced Will to some big names, but what they don't know is that Will's friend Chuck goes to meet these people in his place. There, Chuck asks for money and ruins the whole deal with his bad behavior. On the other hand, Will and Skylar spend a romantic evening together, and their relationship starts to deepen. At her house, Skylar asks Will a direct question. She says she got into Stanford, wants to go to California to study, and wants Will to come with her. But Will immediately refuses and starts making all sorts of excuses. Skylar explains to him that he's just stuck in his small world, where he never faces any challenges and is afraid of new things. Hearing this, Will gets upset. He feels that Skylar is just making fun of him, and that, for her, he is just a way to pass the time because he is poor. Skylar, surprised, asks why he is so worried about money. Crying, she says that if she had to choose between her wealthy father's fortune and her father himself, she would always choose her father, not the money. Skylar clearly says that she is scared too, but at least she is honest with Will. Will argues again. Just then, Skylar remembers that Will had repeatedly told her a false story about his 12 brothers. Now Will completely loses his temper and starts shouting. He says that Skylar would never really want to know about his real life, because the truth is that he is an orphan, and people treated him very badly during his childhood. With tears in her eyes, Skylar assures him that she wants to know everything about him, no matter how painful it is. Finally, Skylar confesses her feelings to him. She tells him that she loves him, but Will has already closed off his heart and says in a cold voice, "I don't love you." After this, Will meets Professor Lambeau. Lambeau is angry because Will's behavior at the meeting with the business partners ruined everything. Will bursts out in anger and says that he's not even sure anymore if he really wants this academic career. Now the conversation between Will and Professor Lambeau becomes even more difficult because Will's sharp intellect makes Lambeau feel inferior. Lambeau says that he expected at least a little gratitude from Will. They argue, and Will storms off in anger. Sometime later, Will is called for a job at the National Security Agency, NSA, where he's promised a brilliant career. But Will flatly refuses. He says that he doesn't want to ruin an ordinary person's life just for political games. After this, Will meets Sean again. Sean asks him why he turned down the NSA job. Will laughs and says, "I'm just waiting for a better opportunity." Sean, who is his psychologist, asks Will if he has any friend with whom he can share his feelings, or if he ever feels lonely. Instead of answering, Will starts listing the names of famous philosophers. Then Sean explains that real relationships can only be formed with living people. Sean then asks if Will is truly serious about his future. What is it that he actually wants? Will jokes. He says that he wouldn't mind laying bricks or even becoming a shepherd. Sean realizes that Will is just joking and running away from his own truth. Angrily, Sean throws him out of his office. Will is left shocked, wondering why he was thrown out. Then Sean clearly says, "Because you're not answering honestly, you're just hiding your true self." While talking to Sean, Will asks, "You talk about your life partner, but where is your wife?" Sean calmly replies, "She's no longer in this world." Time passes, and Will calls Skylar. But by now, Skylar has stopped waiting for him, because Will never makes a firm decision. Skylar says for the last time, "I love you, take care of yourself," and then she leaves for California. On the other hand, Will starts working construction in Boston with his friend Chuck. Meanwhile, Professor Lambeau, while talking on the phone, says that Will is no longer fulfilling his responsibilities. If he reports to the court that Will isn't attending his sessions, Will go back to jail, and this time Lambeau's conscience will be clear. During a break at work, Chuck asks Will what he's going to do next in life. Will jokes that he doesn't want to be a lab rat solving math problems, but instead wants to stay in Boston and have fun with his friends. But this time, Chuck openly scolds Will. He says that Will is wasting his talent. Chuck even admits that every day he wishes that one day Will leave his house and make a real life for himself. Meanwhile, Lambeau finds out that Will is no longer going to therapy with Sean either. Angrily, Lambeau threatens Sean that he will tell the judge everything and accuses Sean of pushing Will back towards crime. Sean tells Professor Lambeau that he doesn't care if people laugh at him, but he cannot ignore Will's feelings. Sean says that Lambeau never learned to accept true love and has spent his whole life alone. But Lambeau is not willing to listen to him. He thinks that Sean is jealous of his success. Hearing this, Sean is surprised and feels that Lambeau is just arrogant. Sean explains that he only cares about Will's future and his true desires, while Lambeau's pressure could ruin him. At that moment, Lambeau quietly leaves, leaving Will alone with Sean. Sean tells Will that his conflict with Lambeau isn't personal, but rather connected to old issues. Then, changing the subject, Sean says that he has prepared a report about Will for the judge. Will asks him if he has had other patients like him. At that moment, Sean shares his personal life for the first time and reveals that his father was an alcoholic who used to beat him a lot. He tells Will that none of what happened to him was his fault. He tells Will that whatever happened to him was not his fault. At first, Will tries to brush it off with jokes, but then suddenly breaks down and reveals his true feelings. Eventually, everything becomes clear. His father was an alcoholic and used to beat him a lot during his childhood. Will comes to Sean for his final session and tells him that he has decided to join one of the companies suggested by Professor Lambeau and that he is happy with this decision. Sean also says that he has thought about traveling the world a bit, and before leaving, he gives Will his number. In the evening, Will celebrates his birthday with his friends. His friends gift him a car that they built by assembling old parts. Meanwhile, Professor Lambeau comes to meet Sean. The two apologize to each other and then head out to a bar for a drink together. On the other hand, as always, Chuck comes to pick up Will. But this time, he sees that Will is not at home. Seeing this, Chuck is very happy, just like he had always dreamed in his dreams. Will had left a note for Sean. Sean reads it and finds out that Will has quit his job and gone to California to be with Skylar. In that note, Will writes the same line that Sean once said to his friends when he decided to leave the baseball game to meet his future wife. And in this beautiful way, the story comes to an end. This story teaches us that true success in life doesn't come from a degree or a job, but from recognizing true love and our real purpose.